Welcome back to another episode of In Swine Versation, Levers, Boardroom, and Feed Talk with Trey Keller from AMVC. Welcome to the program, Trey.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jim.
So you're the managing partner and swine nutritionist at AMVC. Give me a little bit of background about your journey in the industry, where you started, where you came from, and where you are today, Trey.
Sure. So I grew up in a small rural community in Northwest Kansas by the name of Stockton. My start in the swine industry is really two-pronged. First, my dad was a cooperative feed mill manager. So oftentimes, to spend some good time with them in the evenings or weekends during the busy feed system or feed season, right? Would often, go up and spend some time with them in the feed mill and tried to push a broom around the mill and help them clean up as a small 7 and 8 year old. And then from there, as I'd spend time in that feed mill, just started to ask more questions about, why is this diet being made this certain way? And why are we including this ingredient instead of this ingredient, for this ration? And a lot of times my dad would answer, oh, well, we work with, various nutritionists to help us formulate, these diets to meet these animals' requirements at this specific age of growth. And from that early age, that occupation and that objective and that drive to feed animals, that interest really developed at a really young age, and that was kind of my pursuit all the way along. At the same point in time, I also had a modest show pig operation as well, and showed around the region and state. So both on the production and the feed manufacturing side as a young kid, right, develop those aspects. When I got into high school and college, had the opportunity to work in that feed mill that my dad oversaw, and then kind of started my college career at a small community college first in Colby, Kansas, and then got my bachelor's of animal science at the University of Nebraska, where Phil Miller and Tom Berkey were my mentors and big influencers, and got me into grad school at Iowa State, where I got my master's and PhD under John Patience. From there, upon graduation, had the opportunity to become AMVC's first swine nutritionist. So I've been working with AMVC nearly 7 years now within that capacity. And since then have been able to grow the team to have two master's nutritionists work with me as well. So oversee them as well as our feed desk and our accounts and receivables personnel as well. So that's kind of where I've gotten a little kind of long story, very short, to where I am today.
Is the feed mill still there, Trey?
Yeah, the feed mill's still there in Stockton, Kansas. Still does multi-species, diets for local producers around the area.
So when you're in the feed mill and you kind of fell in love with it, was it more a love to get a career, or was it a passion overall?
Oh, I'd say a passion overall, right? It was understanding the science right behind, why certain feedstuffs or ingredients are used, and even within the same animal, right? Why a nursery pig ration looks like this, and why a growing pig ration looks like this, and the finishing pig ration, outside of corn and bean meal, has very little in common with a nursery pig ration, right? And understanding at first, like the concept of protein and starch and fiber, and then going down further into amino acids and how some amino acids are essential and some are non-essential, right? And just, as I went through high school and college and got a further understanding of that and tying it back to those questions I was asking, as a 7 and 8 year old, those are questions that I still ask today. And sometimes I still think about, climbing up on a pallet of feed, right? And listening to my dad and, observing him and asking those questions today. And now I have had the unique opportunity to help construct a feed mill that we're opening in Hamlin, Iowa here in 8 weeks. So it's kind of been full circle from sitting in a feed mill as a young kid to now being part of that process with the great team and coworkers that I have here at AMVC, to construct a 400,000 ton mill on an annual basis. That's kind of been a neat closed loop kind of opportunity. So,
How did you rise the ranks to become a managing partner?
sure. So, as I said, I was kind of hired as AMVC's first internal swine nutritionist. So before, all nutrition aspects at AMVC kind of been outsourced, and I think the partners identified an opportunity to ensure that someone was overseeing the checkbook at a high level, right? So feed is, of course, the largest expense of getting a pig to market. And in ensuring that someone's internals and accountable for that expense item, I think was a good thing to identify. And somehow I was lucky enough to be chosen for the opportunity. I had a really great mentor in Joel Schmidt, who is the first managing partner of AMVC Nutritional Services. So Joel was the managing partner from the creation of Nutritional Services in '92 to July of last year, where unfortunately he passed away suddenly. So I kind of stepped into the opportunity of managing partner kind of on a day's notice, and have been, developing and increasing our team since. So Joel was outstanding in terms of, letting me first kind of create what our nutrition program and protocol should look like without necessarily have to worry about the business aspect of our division. And then from there, kind of slowly introduce me into the business aspect of, how nutritional services is ran and managing, and, annual reviews and quarterly reviews and all those things that you have to do when you have reports, right? And then from there, there was going to be a transition. Unfortunately, it just happened a bit sooner than we were all expecting, and we all miss Joel dearly. I know I sure do every day. And but I'm also glad that I had, those 5+ years with him to learn under him, and then also that. Yeah, had the opportunity to be invited to be a partner of AMVC, and then within the specific role of overseeing our nutrition services division.
So you mentioned being a kid on the feed pallet with a vision. How is the vision different now than when you started?
Sure. There are a lot of it that's not all that different, right? I still wake up every day excited about the ability to feed pigs as best as I can, right? That was the passion and the drive from when I was 7 or 8 years old was how do we feed animals as best as we can? And how do I understand it further to get better every day, right? That's still the same drive that I have today. Now, I will say it's a lot different than feeding, the 6 to 8 pigs that I had at home, where today I probably have 2 million pigs on feed that I have to oversee and be responsible for, right? So it is a bit different. I would say also in terms of just understanding the differences within economic variables and then regional variables as well. So within our management system, we are feeding pigs from Ohio to the desert of Arizona and the Central Valley of California to nearly the Canada border, right? So those feedstuffs and ingredients look completely different just based off of those regional sources. And then as well, just the economic differences that I've experienced in my short career, right? We went from everything from, near $3 corn to near, $9 corn in some of our regions. Soybean meal has changed dramatically. And then, of course, pig revenue has been highly variable during that period as well. Everything, from the tariffs overseas to the black swan event of African swine fever in China and the increase of imports. And then we're kind of today in kind of this hyperinflation type market where everything's kind of high, and, pig producers really aren't making anything, even though pig values, seasonably, don't look all that bad, but due to our input costs and other things, has been difficult to work through the past 18 months. So yeah, I would say, as a 7 and 8 year old, you kind of barely understand the concept of a dollar. So that has changed for sure. Just understanding that not only are we trying to develop the best feeding programs that we can, but we're also managing that checkbook for our pork producers in that same cadence, right? That same step. So I would say that's what's changed the most from when I was a kid. It's just understanding that our feeding programs have such a financial impact for the producers that we work with, and that sometimes is just as important as the pig.
So earlier this year, SwineWeb released a USA major producer list, and AMVC was ranked, I think, number 10. What stands out for the point of success for you guys?
Sure. So I would say as a young partner, kind of looking as a fresh perspective on what's made AMVC successful is a couple different things. I would say first that, my senior partners did an outstanding job of not having set objectives that might have pigeonholed them into making incorrect decisions or decisions that was just trying to meet a goal or objective instead of looking at opportunities more organically. So they never really had a written goal that we want to be at 100,000 sows or 150,000 sows by X, or, we want to, we want to manage, 50% more clients or whatever that was. It was, when opportunities were brought to them, or they sought out opportunities, does this make fit for the current group of skill sets and talent pool that we have today to successfully be able to manage or produce this? And from there, that growth just kind of occurred organically. I would say the second thing that they were very successful at, and one thing that we try to implement every day, is just doing the right thing and being professional. So those are kind of the two mottos or taglines that we say all the time, right? Do the right thing. And then we always say that we're professionally, raising and feeding pigs. So treating, your customers, fairly, like your best friends, and, treating your employees and your teammates like family. Those type of things, even though it might sound cheesy, I think over the past 30 years of what AMVC has done and stood for is really kind of, the success is there, right? As you said, in terms of the growth that we've had over our past 30 years. The other thing that's really unique is, basically 30 years ago, it was a small traditional fire engine vet clinic, right? That had 8 employees, right? A couple veterinarians, a couple techs, and 1 accountant. From there, we're nearly 1,000 employees in, just a little over 30 years. So that's a pretty remarkable growth, of a small rural company, right? So I would say one thing that's also allowed AMVC to be successful is just maintaining that small company culture and maintaining the culture, whether you're at a sow farm in Arizona or you're in our office here in Audubon, that you feel connected, like you're back in that small, fire engine vet clinic. So I'd say those 3 things, evaluating opportunities as they come to you or sought out, not necessarily having a written growth goal down that you're trying to hammer towards to, and sometimes putting a square peg through a round hole that may not be the best fit and may cause you to go backwards. The second thing too is just being professional and treating everyone fairly as they were, your family members and your best friends. And then the third thing too is just maintaining the positive culture and that small company like culture that we had, clear back 30 years ago. So as a young partner, I would say that's one thing that I've seen that's allowed AMVC to be successful over the past 30 years.
So sustaining the culture moving forward, is there more growth to attain, Trey?
Yeah, I think there is. I think as we've looked at the past 18 months and how difficult it's been on us and our clients, right? It's been just as, if you look at the financials, the actuals and projections, it's been just as bad as 1998. And once again, going back to a young kid, I remember eating pork, breakfast, lunch, and dinner because, the pigs that my dad would feed and oversee, they were basically just given to him, right? We would harvest them, in someone's basement and, everyone would have, pork given around because that's just how bad the market was. And even though we don't have 8-cent pigs, the loss due to inputs costs are just the exact same, if not even a little worse than it was, back during that period. So one thing that I think we've identified and others has identified is the need to reevaluate, where are our assets? Where are we successful? What is dragging us back in terms of production or finances? And then what can we do internally really well? And then what items should we seek out external support because they can do it better or they can do it cheaper than we can do it internally? And I think that's something where AMVC can position or be positioned for, other pork producers that are seeking those opportunities, is looking at the talent and the resources and the capabilities that we have to potentially help them out in 1 or 2 of those areas. So whether that growth from AMVC is internal in terms of own production or external in terms of helping producers get through this dark time to where they're able to take advantages of better times ahead. And hopefully that's real soon, right? Hopefully that's April or May of next year. We're able to start maintaining a profit again. But yeah, I think, really taking a hard look at what we're able to do well and then what we need support on. I think every producer within our industry should be doing. And we have the opportunity to help service some of those needs. We'll look at that and hopefully be able to help out where we can.
So what levers can swine nutritionists pull to manage the checkbook of pork producers, Trey?
Sure. Yeah, so over the past 18 months, it has felt like there hasn't been a lot of levers to pull. First of all, it's just the big monkey in the room. How do you overcome a $40 to $60 loss per pig? Well, you can't, right? But what you can do is come up with, several, quarter to a dollar type wins to try to bridge that gap as much as possible to where you're able to survive and not have a more unfortunate outcome. So if we look at where feedstuffs have been just, in the corn belt for sure, right? We've had high input costs. And the biggest input cost that's been high over the past 18 months has been energy, right? So before COVID, fat was about 24 to 32 cents per pound. Since COVID, it's been 60 to, even 80 cents per pound, depending on which fat source that you're using. So based off of that, then it's driven, corn price even more. And then, of course, the past two drought years. So then from there, everything's being inflated. So, just meeting our energy spec alone sometimes is 90% of the overall feed cost. So due to that, basically the only lever that nutritionists have had to pull in terms of a macro perspective is to feed low energy, higher fiber diets, right? Which is reduced, has made feed conversion worse, right? So you'd think in a high input time, right, we would want a feed conversion to be as low as possible, and that's correct. But when you feed a low energy diet, what's the one thing that's going to do? Feed efficiency is going to inflate on you. So then from there, then looking at opportunities to better utilize that fiber, whether that's an enzyme blend or different additives or whatever that may be to increase feed efficiency when using a high fiber diet, so the pig can better utilize distillers or mids or whatever fiber source you may be using to quote unquote, try to lower the energy density of that diet. So that's probably been the biggest lever that can be pulled. And for us, at least in the West Central Corn Belt, oftentimes that lever is just where distillers is priced relative to corn. So, 4 or 5 months ago, that was about 80%. Now that corn's decreased with new crop corn and distillers isn't caught up, we have some distillers that's over 130% the price of corn, right? So from there, you're just trying to manage the relationship among ingredients, soybean meal to corn to distillers to soybean meal, and then figuring out, how best to meet those growth targets and those feed efficiency targets as well as you can. I would say the one thing that we've really emphasized as well is not only in terms of diet formulation, but then in terms of execution from the feed mill to the slat level, right? So are we manufacturing, feed correctly? Do we have our ingredients correctly characterized in terms of their nutrient composition and ingredient value? Are we then getting that feed to correct bin? Do we have timely orders, or are we having out of feed events? Are we setting our feeders correctly? Are we starting pigs on feed, et cetera? That stuff might sound really elementary, things that you learn, in your 4-H and FFA chapters, things that you learn in basic feedstuffs 101. But, executing that on a daily function, can be $1 to, as you add all those things up to maybe even $10 a pig if you get those things right versus then getting all those wrong. So as we said, there is no solution to how do we save $40 a pig via feed program, right? That's impossible. But what we can do is have one or two small wins, whether that's having the correct formulations and reevaluating that on a timely basis, both from an ingredient and then a pricing perspective, then having the correct additive strategy to try to lower feed efficiency as greatly as we can with those feedstuffs that we have included, and then making sure that we get the slat level execution correct as much as we can each and every day.
So when we talk about pulling levers, have you created an ecosystem for this, and what's working, what isn't working?
Sure. Yeah, I would say, we look at that as a gross scale and then a micro scale as well. So we look at, system-wide, what are projected, average daily gain, feed conversion, average daily feed intake, and then, kind of what our profit loss should be. And then we try to drill down, to each individual business unit, flow, sometimes even sites, right, to identify those opportunities. So in terms of that greater ecosystem, right, as we're trying to evaluate that, it's both macro and micro in terms of how we're trying to manage that as best we can.
So you mentioned the slat level before. So how do you think we need to create influence at the boardroom and the slat level?
Yeah, so I think when we talk about protocols and practices, you need buy-in from the boardroom and then you need buy-in at the slat level, and each are equally important. And here's why. I have pigs that are on feed from California to Ohio and from Canada to Arkansas, right? And here I am in Audubon, Iowa on this podcast currently. So I can't be everywhere at once. So, first of all, you need buy in at the boardroom, meaning here's the protocols and practices we want to put in place. Are we all 100% committed to champion these protocols and practices, right? If you get that buy in from your veterinarians, your CEOs, CFOs, accountants, all the way down to your production managers, et cetera, then they can take those protocols and practices and be champions for you. So as they're going to every site that you can't be at today, hopefully they're echoing that message. At the same point in time, just as important and as equally as important is in buying at the slat level, right? So your protocols and practices have to be clear, concise, and easily repeatable. One phrase that I've used here recently is you need to be able to hum it just like a Taylor Swift song, right? So Taylor Swift is highly popular, right? Because all our songs are really catchy. Whether you like that type of music or not, chances are, you can get a Taylor Swift song stuck in your head, right? If we have a good protocol or a good practice, it also gets stuck in your head, right? So if it's 10 steps that are real wordy, is that going to be memorized and followed every time? Probably not, right? So how do we get our protocols and practices into a form that's easily understandable, easily translatable, especially, to our Latin employees, easily repeatable, and then easily validated? One thing that I think that we all struggle as pork producers is we have a whole bunch of lag measurements, right? We look at closeout data or sow KPI data, but how often are we tracking lead measurements, right? Lead measurements are, things like, are we pulling pigs at the correct time? Are we calibrating sows correctly? How many out of feed events do we have? Are our feeder pen settings correct in terms of, how tight we want those feeders? Do we talk about those things, but do we measure it? And then do we have that scorecarded? And then do we follow up? In most instances, that answer is no, right? So I think one thing that we're looking at and try to be innovative on is, how do we better scorecard those lead measurements so then our lag measurements aren't a surprise, right? And we're able to make those lag measurements better because we caught the problem 5 months before that closeout, report came out. So those are a couple things, but yeah, it's important to have buy-in from your peers, that leadership team. And then it's just as important to have buy-in at the slat level. And that communication needs to be clear, and that communication needs to be repeatable, and that communication and those protocols and practices need to somehow be validated.
So is creating an efficient chain of communication the most vital message or something else, Trey?
Yeah, I think it is. And I think that's the one thing that's the most challenging, right? So, at our leadership team level, we all have listservs or Teams pages or, instant messaging or, their next door neighbors. When we talk about, large systems, your states and time zones away. So if you're printing something off or you're sending something on a PowerPoint slide or in an email, how can you ensure that that message or that practice or that protocol is just as clear as if you and I are talking, here on Zoom recording this podcast today? I think that is the ultimate secret sauce, right? Is the execution and communicating. How do we get this executed to where there's not interpretation? I used to think as a young new nutritionist that, oh, they're going rogue, right? They're doing something different than what was instructed. And it took me about 6 months to 2 years to figure out that they weren't going rogue. We were allowing them an opportunity, or more importantly, I was being way too wordy or way too complex with the protocols and practices to where they're being interpreted incorrectly, right? And not by anyone trying to cut corners or, oh, well, I know better than what this person is telling me. They're just too complex, right? So steps were being missed or misunderstood or misinterpreted. No one was going rogue. It was on me. I was the one that was messing up. So yeah, keeping things simple, consistent, clear, repeatable. As I said, kind of like a Taylor Swift song, right? There's 5 words to the refrain. You know exactly what it is, right? protocols and practices should be in a very similar format.
So that's some good information from the slat level to the boardroom. Now let's slide over to how do we successfully create and implement sow feeding programs? What's your methodology?
Yeah, so kind of building off the previous answer is first evaluate across our system of what are our capabilities and what are our weaknesses and strengths. And then how do we create protocols and practices that fit 90% of our facilities and our teams? And then how do we create flexibility, quote unquote, for those outliers? I think often when systems think about protocol or practice development, sometimes they try to be too perfect, or sometimes they try to keep things too basic to where it fits every single facility and every single situation. There needs to be a nice balance between the two, right? To where, hey, in 90% of our instances, this is what should be followed. For these two or three, outliers or differences in facility type or feeder system or genetics or whatever it may be, right? Here's the alternative protocol or practice, or here's the steps to then go outside this protocol or practice. From there, as I said, I try to keep things really simple and repeatable across our system. So, if you're going to a sow farm for first time, you know exactly what our feeding protocols and practices should be, and it's real clear. The other thing too is I try to make things visible. So one thing that we've had success on is using the sow caliper to set our gestation feed settings. And so one thing that we've done is not only caliper sows, but we then basically give them a color score based off of whether they're thin, ideal, or heavy. And then therefore that they are visibly scoring them. And then that score is visibly tracked, all the way through gestation and into lactation. So once again, if we have someone from HR, one of our veterinarians, or one of our, maintenance people or engineers, right, they can easily see that, hey, this sow farm is being calipered and these feed boxes are being set correctly, or they're not, right? It's a visualization saying, yes, this has been done. So I think when you're able to do those type of things to where you have a visual validation to say, yes, this is being done correctly, or, well, they're telling me that they're doing this, but I'm not sure. I guess I have to take their word for it, or I don't. That's where you can get some weaknesses in interpretation, once again, in those protocols and practices. So from there, yeah, same with our lactation feeding programs. One thing that we've done is try to pre-farrow feed or limit feed pre-farrow to try to reduce our stillborn rate. So, having, boxes just like in gestation to where, okay, it's a set amount and we can visually validate that, yes, those boxes were set correctly prior to when they farrowed. Or, if we do have to hand feed, having scoops, that are labeled, hey, here's 2 pounds on this scoop. So that way we're not over or under feeding them correctly. So just some simple things like that I found to be really helpful as I've learned, what works and what doesn't work over the past 7 years.
Are you still open to trying new things or any new trends we need to be aware of?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that we all have questions on. So sow mortality, continues to increase across our industry, not just within our system, but across all systems. And it's been about 1% to 2% increase per year here for about the past 5 years. So have tried to once again dig into the literature, understand where our mortality is occurring and why those removals are happening. And then is there anything that we can do from whether that's a feed program or our management, protocols and practices to try to reduce that, or at least stop that annual increase from occurring, right? So yeah, I definitely think I'm open to opportunities and learning new things within that aspect for sure. On the south side, I would say on the finishing side, one thing that we've seen is a dramatic increase in feed intake and average daily gain, which has been different over the past, 5 years from where I was first hired. So if that's the case, then how do I better, use energy or worry about feed conversion? Because barn throughput is not as big a factor as it used to be, with today's advances in genetics. So yeah, always open to new things. I think that's the day that you think you have it figured out is the lesson that you learn tomorrow, right? So always open for new things, but those are the two things that stick out for me is, sow mortality, and how do we, continue to increase, pigs weaned per sow per year through that, about having more sows that farrow and wean. And then, how do we improve feed conversion with today's genetics?
Any myths about feed?
Could you say that one more time, Jim?
Any myths about feed?
Any advance about feed?
Myths,
Oh, myths
MYTHS.
about feed. Yeah, sorry, Jim.
So
Myths about feed. Sure. Yeah, there's a lot. I think first and foremost, when it comes to like vices, so tail biting, side biting, ear biting, right? It seems like the easiest thing to blame is feed. And feed can be one of those factors, right? We've seen that where if we are able to increase lysine level, not that lysine is the reason that we have those vices, but those vices seem to be stymied, right? One great example of how I know that that's a myth is, during COVID, we had to feed, reduced lysine diets, to try to, keep our backlog and our weights, at a manageable spot for our pig producers. And, we probably had, 200,000 to 400,000 pigs on, kind of those restrictive type diets. And our vice level was very low to nothing, right? So clearly that is not the main cause. One thing that we've learned here recently is, prolapses, right? That is a little bit heritable. And there's some different components to that. It's not necessarily just a feed, deal, right? So when we think about those mortality or, those morbidity type events, it's not all squarely on feed. I think too, one thing that, is a myth about feed is that I think a lot of people don't understand the science and the accuracy and the precision about feed. Even very knowledgeable pig producers or pig scientists, right? We're trying to understand what each and every ingredient has from a chemical and nutrient perspective, and we're trying to formulate that to a precise amount. And as we continue to allow new innovations in technology into our feed systems in terms of electronically tracking feed trucks and then feed bin levels and then feeder settings. And then, to the point where hopefully we have real life growth curves for each and every barn. So we're not surprised when, the first cut comes back 20 pounds light or 20 pounds heavy, right? I think that's another myth is, feed's just feed, let's move on, right? There's a lot of science and technology and understanding about feed. And we're trying to get it as accurate and precise as we can each and every day.
we got final question, Trey. Is the next step in the pork industry to work together from within, or do we need outside supports to drive the industry to the next level?
Yeah, I would say both. Maybe this is just a perspective from where I'm at within my career, but it feels like that pork producers are more willing to be collaborative with each other than maybe what it was 20 or 30 years ago. And I don't know if that's the case, right? I wasn't in the industry back then, so I don't know if that's, just what I'm being told or if that's the actual truth, but it seems like my colleagues and peers are a lot more willing to share notes and learn from each other. There's a great saying around that, smart people learn from their mistakes, but, really smart people learn from others' mistakes, right? So I think if we can just, share successes or failures, among our peers and colleagues, we're likely to be more successful. At the same point in time, as I said earlier, right, you need to look at things that you can't do well internally. Or why are we spending that much time on those tasks internally when that talent can, do other things more effectively and provide a greater return for our system? And what should we be seeking outwards to make our pork production systems more efficient? A couple of things that come to mind there is data. We're able to collect a lot of data on the slat level, but our ability to analyze it and our ability to make effective decisions with it and predictive decisions with it has been limited. And sometimes that's frustrating, right? You know that it's there within the database, but, to be able to use it and then make system-wide decisions or site, specific decisions is tedious and frustrating. And you feel like there should be more opportunities to advance, our industry and our systems forward with that. I think that's one thing that, our pork, our industry should look at is, should we be outsourcing more of those analytics? Other things in terms of, as we continue to learn more about genotyping and microbiome and, things that's beyond our area of expertise within our pork systems, how much of that, needs to be outsourced, and can we start making decisions, on a flow specific level or site specific level, whether that's precision feeding or maybe that's, more precise vaccines and feed med programs, et cetera. And then, as we continue to increase, regulations and sustainability efforts, once again, are those things that should be outsourced versus been done internal. So, yeah, I think it's a combination of two. I think it's learning from each other and kind of putting our egos aside and saying like, hey, here's kind of how I failed. And here's a nice success story or two. What have you found? What have you learned? Or, hey, this is a question I have. Have you found anything on this? And then I think it's also second, right? Reaching out and maybe once again, setting a little bit of that ego aside. I think as a group, pork producers, we're kind of a stubborn bunch. That's why we're kind of committed to getting through some of these poor economic times that we're facing. But at the same point in time, understanding here's what we do well, here's what we need help on, and then going to find the best resource or the best team or the best group to help you out with those weaknesses may mean the difference between having this poor time be rougher or making it through to a better day.
Well, it was a great swine versation today, Trey. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for the opportunity, Jim, and the good discussion. Really appreciate it.